Hi and welcome to today's episode in which we make a delicious and comforting soup that's all about taking a few humble ingredients and turning it into something incredible. When I was doing the bacon and onion marmalade to go in the breakfast crunch pocket a couple of weeks ago, as I was stirring the onions, I thought it's been ages since I made French onion soup and I quite fancy it because it's cold and that's comforting and warm. So that's what we're going to do today. It's a simple and straightforward enough soup to make. It just takes a bit of time because you've got to caramelise the onions. When I was making that onion marmalade, I tried out a technique that shortens the cooking time. You kind of simmer the onions in a bit of water first. That starts the cooking process and then they start caramelising much faster. So I'm going to do a similar thing to that. Given that I'm doing something French, I had to have a look and see what Monsieur Blanc had to say about French onion soup. I think I've had this cookbook since 2002 when it came out. I feel like I bought it fairly brand new, so it's over 20 years, and I think I've made it once or twice.
Hiya.
Hiya.
Is it right, Charlie?
Yeah.
Thank you, darling.
Thank you. Don't think I've ordered anything, so let's see what's in here. Yes. One of my patrons has very kindly bought me a new pot off my Amazon wish list. If you saw the birthday carrot cake video, the saucepan I used was way too small for the caramel, so I stuck this on the list that night. Oh, amazing. Yay. Thank you. Raymond's recipe is very simple. It's butter, onions, a bit of flour, white wine, water, salt and pepper. I'm going to add in a couple of herbs and I might do some garlic. There'll be some French people that are hearing that and thinking it's sacrilege, but it's my soup and I'll do what I want with it. I'm going to use red onions in mine because that's what I've got in. White would be better because they've got a slightly stronger flavour and a bit more acidity. I've got just under 1 kilo of onions. I was going to do my onions on the mandolin, but I think I'm actually going to use the food processor because it's going to be faster. I'm going to use the slicing discs, so I've gone for the coarser one. I'll peel and halve the onions, chuck them in a bowl, and then I'll do the slicing in the food processor off camera, just so I'm not having to move everything around. All I'm going to do is take the sprout end off, chop them in half. It'll kind of tell you where it wants to be peeled. Some of the outside layers will be a bit tougher. While I'm slicing the onions, I'm going to add a cup of water, that's probably 300 mils or so, into my pan. Onions are all peeled, so I'm going to chuck those through the food processor. There we go, in less than a minute. So let's head over to the pot, tumble the onions in. Give it a little bit of a stir, turn the heat up, and then cover that back up. So that had another couple minutes on 4, so I've now turned it up to 6. And then I'm just going to leave this to do its thing for as long as it needs. All of the recipes I've seen for French onion soup use flour. I'm assuming as a thickener. None of them actually say why. Raymond's recipe says to toast the flour first, so I'm going to do that because I think it's going to add a nice kind of toasty bit of depth of flavour. His uses the oven. I'm not going to do that because I think it's ridiculous to put an entire oven on to toast 2 tablespoons of flour. And I can't do it in the air fryer because that will just go everywhere. So I'm going to do it on the stove in a pan. His recipe is just for 1 tablespoon. I might do 3. I'd rather have it and chuck it in the bin if I don't need it than suddenly not have enough flour. That'd probably work out at 4 tablespoons or so. And I'm just going to do that very slowly, put that on 5 or 6 eventually. Normally with French onion soup, you take some big chunks of baguette, slightly stale, and melt Gruyere cheese or similar over the top of it. Then you have that on top and the soup kind of soaks into the bread, softens it down, the cheese mingles with the soup. It's delicious. I don't have any French bread. I've got Hovis seed sensations. It's just a standard seeded loaf. Couldn't be bothered going to the shop. The cafe around the corner closed on Sundays apparently. I'm going to put a couple of slices in the air fryer because I want them to kind of go like croutons almost, like crisp all the way through but without lots of colour. So I'm just going to do that in the background. In fact, I might even cut them down into the crouton shape. I've decided to leave them as slices because I don't want them flying up in the air fryer, you know, if they're really small. Yeah, I'm going to take that off the heat because I'm worried it's going to burn. It's kind of the colour of sand. Let's have a look at the onions. Perfect. Okay, so the onions are now at the point where I want them to be. Once they start going translucent, that means they're starting to cook and the cell walls are collapsing. So they're releasing all the natural juice. I'm going to leave the lid off. All of this moisture will evaporate. Then we start with the caramelization process. Here's my little toasted slices. I use the preheat setting at 160, which is 3 minutes. Did that, turned it over. It's still a bit soft in the middle, but the outside is nice and crisp. I'm going to leave them in the hot air fryer so they will crisp a bit more in there as well. There's a lot of steam. Don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but the liquid becomes a little bit thick and glossy. At this stage, I'm still on 6 on the stove. Mine goes up to 9. In Raymond's recipe, he just uses boiling water. I'm going to use some chicken flavour stock powder. I'm not going to make it as strong as I would usually for a chicken flavour stock. If you can hear lots of banging, I'm not in the middle of a war zone. It's fireworks. I'm going to do a big spoonful, probably a tablespoon and a half, something like that. And then I'll take this up to a litre, which is around 4 cups. I'm going to grate some of this Cathedral City plant-based extra mature vegan cheddar. I'm going to melt this on top of the little bits of toast. I've seen recipes for caramelised onions where the advice is to pour the liquid away once your onions are cooked. Don't do that, please. You're throwing away flavour. It's madness. Just patience and heat. That's all we need. That's the amount of garlic I'm going to put in mine, I think. By the time I've minced it down, probably a tablespoon, something like that. We're getting to the point where most of the liquid is evaporated. Now comes the point where you need to be kind of eagle-eyed with it. Don't walk away too long from it, otherwise you're going to start getting burned bits, which you don't want. Because these are red onions, it's hard to see the colour change. It's not as apparent as it would be if they were white, but I can see, whereas before it was more vividly purple, now it's kind of leaning into burgundy maroon kind of thing. I'll briefly mention the other things I'm going to put in here. So I've got some dried thyme, and then some dried savoury. Savoury is, I want to say it's part of the rosemary family. So it's a little bit woody, aromatic, kind of like thyme, oregano, those kind of flavours. I think these will just lift the flavour of the onion a little bit. I'm going to finish this bit of sherry, and then I'm going to use some of this vermouth. Vermouth, whatever you like calling it, is fortified white wine. On the back of it, it says it's infused with herbs and spices. It doesn't taste like it. It just tastes like white wine. That's why I keep it, because white wine will go bad at some point in the fridge, whereas this is shelf stable. Just use white wine or whatever you've got. You can quite drastically change the flavour profile of the soup by using, for example, beef flavour stock and a red wine or a port, that kind of thing. Onions are starting to stick to the bottom, so let's get in there, give it some good attention. It's difficult to get you in close enough to see without getting you all fogged up, but there's almost no excess liquid spilling out of it now. I'm going to go in with a spatula just so I can get to the bottom of the pan easily. This is where we're at the moment. I could probably go a bit further, but I've been cooking these onions for an hour and I'm tired. Now I'm going to add in the herbs and garlic, half teaspoon of the savoury and a half teaspoon of the thyme. Work that into it. And you can see the drastic reduction in volume from where we started. And for a bit of richness, I'm going to fry the garlic off in a bit of butter. So I've pushed everything to the sides. Got about a tablespoon of vegan margarine. I'd use butter if I had it. I used it all up in the caramel frosting. That's probably a tablespoon and a half or so of minced garlic. I'll let that fry just in the centre on its own for a minute or two, just to make sure it's nicely cooked before I bring it into the onions. Now mix all of that in together. I'm going to add a heaped tablespoon of the toasted flour. Scatter that over and then work that in. Yeah, toasting the flour, I can smell really lovely edge to it. Now it's time for the booze. Using alcohol is completely optional. Feel free to just use stock or water or whatever you like. So that is 100 ml of the sherry and 100 ml of the white vermouth. I'm going to let that cook for a minute or so. I think I'm going to heat the stock up a bit in the microwave. I should have done that earlier really. I'm going to add some black pepper and then I'll hold the salt until I've got the stock in there. And then I'm going to add the stock. Then this needs to simmer for 15 minutes. And then maybe 5 minutes or so, I'll start toasting my little croutons with cheese on. I'm going to add a small pinch of salt and then I'll taste it again at the end. Just going to cheese up my little croutons. What I'm trying to do is pack the cheese down on top of it just to stop it flying off in the air fryer. I could put the oven on, but it just seems real wasteful. I'm going to sprinkle on a little bit of water just to help it melt, see if that helps. I'll do the 160 for 3 minutes and see what that looks like. So the soup's been simmering for about 10 minutes and I think that's looking pretty good. I was debating whether to add more flour, but I think it's actually fine. So now I'm just waiting for my little cheesy croutons to do their thing and then we will do some eating. The onion soup is finished, topped with a little cheesy crouton and ready to be enjoyed. I can see, I don't know how well that's going to be detectable on camera. There's a really smooth patch here. I suspect that's from that bit of water I dribbled on. I'm going to go without the crouton just for the sake of not getting it all over myself. You could also put cheese directly on the top of the soup and then stick it under the grill, maybe in the air fryer, that kind of thing, just melt it directly on top of there. Not a problem. Have a little go. There's a really nice sweetness, but it's balanced with some nice umami flavours. To say that's onions, garlic, herbs and booze. Delicious. The onions have got a little bit of texture to them, but very soft. It's a very comforting soup, but without being heavy, so it'd be fine for lunchtime, that kind of thing. The breads absorb lots of soup, so it's softened down enough to take a smaller piece. The cheese adds a nice bit of salty creaminess that's really nice as an accent. As a meal, it does take a fair bit of time. I wouldn't say it's lots of work or lots of effort, because it's just mostly stirring. But it's not a quick dish. But it's a delicious dish and it's worth it. So if you've got the time, you know, on a weekend afternoon, that kind of thing. How I've made it with the red onions is delicious. So I imagine doing it with the white onions would be even better. But that's almost downplaying how tasty that is. It is incredible. It's just very simple ingredients, shown a lot of love and some patience and time. Can just be elevated up to something really quite stunning. There's probably enough for 4 portions this kind of size. So if you wanted to do a massive quantity of it, might be worth maybe roasting the onions, putting it in a big roasting pan, maybe 2, and just stir it every 15 minutes or something like that. I've never done it that way myself, so I can't speak on exactly how well it'll work. But in theory, I think it'll work quite well. For you, the viewer, this is probably going to be a nice short and sweet video. For me, I've been filming over 2 hours, I think. Most of that was just standing, stirring a pot. Like I say, it's a labour of love, and it's definitely a dish that deserves a bit of labour over it, if you've got the spare time. If you don't like the flavour of wine, you could maybe try doing that with a nice ale. You know, like a darker ale, not kind of a stout dark, but like a nice deep dark brown. Not bitter, you don't want it anything, probably not an IPA or anything like that. If you've got like a beer shop anywhere near you, just ask what would go well with onions. Like a nice sweet brown ale would be quite nice, I think. I'm going to take this moment to say hello and a thank you to my community over on Patreon. I'd mentioned the other day that I was thinking about doing soup, possibly French onion. So I can now report back this evening and say French onion it was, and oh boy, am I glad I did it. I'll leave the link to my Patreon down in the video description for you. There's various monthly tiers. Choose what feels affordable, and it's a nice way of getting some bonus content, behind the scenes, community chat features, all that great stuff. If you're looking for lots more delicious recipes to keep you warm through these chilly days ahead, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tap the bell icon if you want to get an alert as soon as I publish a new one. While you're waiting for the next one, have a look at this.